So today our speaker will be Valery Rubakov from the Institute of Nuclear Research in Moscow. He got his PhD from Institute for Nuclear Research in 1981. Earned his habilitation degree also from the Institute of Nuclear Research in 1989. Valery Rubakov has made important contribution to many areas of physics, ranging from particle physics to cosmology and theory of gravity. And this is exactly what he's going to talk about today. He'll talk about the relationship between experiments in particle physics that are made on the Large Hadron Collider in CERN and their implications for cosmology. Please.
Thank you. We're going to discuss the relationship between cosmology and particle physics, in particular Large Hadron Collider. And to begin with, we now understand particle physics up to the energy scale of 100 GeV, which corresponds to the distance scales of 10 to the minus 16 centimeters. And from very large distances to these microscopic distances, everything is described by the standard model plus gravity, except maybe for neutrino oscillations, which is a separate story. Now, what we're going to move on is the physics at the next energy scale, which corresponds to distances of 10 to the minus 17 centimeters, 1 order of magnitude smaller than we have reached by now. To refresh your memory, the highest energy before the Large Hadron Collider was reached at Tevatron at Fermilab, United States, which was a proton-antiproton collider where protons and antiprotons collided head-on with 2 TeV center of mass energy, and this machine is no longer competitive. It was stopped in last October. The Large Hadron Collider is proton-proton collider, whose design energy is 14 GeV center of mass. And last year was essentially the first physics year of this machine. It was operating at half of the energy. Recently, a few days ago, it started to operate at a little bit higher energy, 8 TeV in the center of mass frame. It's a long-run story. It's not immediate that the discoveries are going to come. For the time being, we have only hints and mostly limits coming from that machine. But that's the first year. Now, we should understand that even though we are talking about 14, or in the present case 8 TeV energy in proton-proton collisions, it's not the proton-proton collisions that are of interest. Of interest are collisions between elementary particles. And the elementary particles are quarks and gluons, of which protons are composed. And roughly speaking, of course, there is the entire distribution in momenta of quarks and gluons in the proton. Well, roughly speaking, the available energy is 1/6 of the total energy. So, in fact, we are talking about TeV energy scale, not 10 TeV energy scale at the Large Hadron Collider. And this should be compared to Tevatron, which is in a few 100 GeV energy range. And another important machine was LAB, the plus and minus collider at CERN, whose energy was about 200 GeV, center of mass energy of 200 GeV. So we are coming from 200 GeV, 300 GeV, up to, if you want to, TeV energy scale. Now, one other thing to remember is that since we are probing distances at very short distance scales and correspondingly high energy regime, the probability of interesting events is small. It's roughly a 4 of the distance squared. You have to, be very exact when you shoot your quark on anti-quark to probe this scale, the physics at these distances, and this means that we need high statistics. That's the reason why we don't have so many discoveries yet from the Large Hadron Collider. The statistics is not sufficient yet. And this also tells you that the lifetime of this machine is going to be long. You need a lot of improvement, you need a lot of statistics to get to really interesting physics. Okay, now, the standard model is very simple. Essentially all constituents of the standard model can be summarized by one transparency. We have leptons, electron, its neutrino, and its brothers. We have quarks, again, UN up and down quarks, of which we are all composed, plus their heavier cousins, antiparticles, and particles that mediate interactions, photons, mediating electromagnetic interactions, gluons, mediating strong interactions, and W and Z bosons that mediate weak interactions. So the story repeats itself, except that W and Z bosons are heavy, they have non-zero masses. Okay. Now, this picture has, of course, very detailed dynamics, and in fact, all what we know about the particle interactions is described by the standard model, and the precision, the typical precision at which the standard model is known is less than 1%. It's rather 1 per mil or so. So we have pretty good precision data, especially concerning electroweak observables obtained earlier at LEP mainly. And these already tell us something about what's going to happen at higher energies. One missing thing is, of course, very well known, Higgs mechanism, or Englert-Brout Higgs mechanism, which should operate, which should be responsible for electroweak symmetry breaking. That's similar to, very similar in principle, but not in realization presumably, to the superconductivity, where you have symmetry breaking and you have Meissner effect, which is very similar to what we have in electroweak theory, W boson mass. Now, the scale of the symmetry breaking sets the electroweak scale, which is roughly a quarter of the W boson mass, which is roughly 100 GeV. So when we probe 100 GeV scale, we actually probe electroweak physics, the interesting physics which has to do with symmetry breaking. Now, the prediction of the standard model is the Higgs boson, and there are first hints at the Large Hadron Collider that there is a Higgs boson, but these are only hints. Maybe within a year we'll know something entirely different. But for the time being, there are first hints that there is the Higgs boson, that its mass is around 125 GeV, and it behaves, if these hints are correct, it behaves more or less as predicted for the simplest version of the Higgs mechanism. One thing to notice is that since we have precision electroweak data, we cannot construct arbitrary theories of symmetry breaking. In advanced matter physics, there are many, many various ways in which symmetry can be broken, and different approaches have been pursued in this in the electroweak physics as well. However, there is very little room by now for anything but elementary or nearly elementary Higgs boson to operate, which is very strange. For a theorist, it would be much more interesting and natural to have a dynamical, non-trivial dynamical mechanism, whereas the Higgs mechanism itself is just the Ginzburg-Landau, without underlying Cooper paradynamics, which is pretty strange. Okay, anyway, still we have a very good handle on physics we know of and measure, but we are confident that the present knowledge of elementary particles and correspondingly fundamental forces is grossly incomplete. There are several reasons for that. One is theoretical. You can call it prejudice, but still it's a concept, it's a reason, which has to do with naturalness. The energy scales characterizing the standard model, the strong interaction scale GeV, the electroweak scale about 100 GeV, are very small. Small compared to the gravitational scale. The gravitational scale is huge, and that's why the gravitational forces are weak. There is a discrepancy. One wonders naturally why the two scales are so different. This goes under the name of gauge hierarchy problem. However, the problem is actually worse, because theorists tend to view the standard model as a low energy effective theory. So presumably there is some theory, say string theory or something like that, at very high and operating at very high energies with a very high energy scale, and the remnant of it at low energies is this standard model. If one takes this view, then one may ask whether the high energy physics inherent in this quadratic theory, whether this high energy physics hides itself and is not visible, is not, doesn't make any effect at low energies. That would be very natural to expect. However, this is not quite true. Namely, you can think of radiative contributions to the electroweak scale, the Higgs boson mass, for example. Okay? And with elementary Higgs, it turns out that these contributions can be very large, and they are very large. Okay? The interaction of the Higgs with this high energy particle will induce the correction to the mass of this Higgs particle, which is proportional to the underlying mass scale of the ultraviolet theory. So, and that's a problem, because the coupling constant here is not small, it's not particularly small, whereas this mass scale is probably very large. Say the Planck scale, or somewhat smaller than the Planck scale. And on the left-hand side, we have to deal with 100 GeV squared, whereas here it's 10 to the 19 GeV squared. So, in other words, the standard model needs extreme fine-tuning in the of the bare couplings and the bare masses, in fact, so that the bare parameters and radiative contribution cancel each other, and the Higgs boson mass is small. The electroweak scale is small, and that's a big problem. Apparently, it's not formally the big problem. You can do order-bar of perturbation theory. You can adjust your bare parameters in such a way that the electroweak scale is small. But that's something you have to work very hard. So theorists try to find ways out, and the natural way out is that probably the standard model is extended to a theory with much better ultraviolet behavior at reasonably low energies, a TeV scale. If this is the case, then the contributions to the Higgs boson mass is proportional to this new scale, m, and if this scale is in the TeV range, then one naturally gets corrections, radiative contributions to the electroweak scale, which is around 100 GeV. That's what precisely is needed. And actually, this simple argumentation is the main reason for expecting something new happening at TeV energy scale. Very simple-minded, very, hand-waving, if you like. Nevertheless, this is seriously believed by theorists to be a strong hint towards physics, new physics, at the TeV energy scale. An example that is famous, but not the only example, there are other approaches. One example is supersymmetry operating at the TeV energy scale, with the supersymmetry breaking in the visible sector at the TeV energy scale. Supersymmetry is a symmetry between bosons and fermions, and assuming supersymmetry means that you assume that all standard model particles, electrons, neutrinos, gluons, photons, everybody has, every particle has its own superpartner with opposite statistics. And if one is thinking about TeV scale supersymmetry, then masses of these particles must be in the ballpark of a few hundred GeV. The miracle of supersymmetry is that the contribution of bosons to the Higgs boson mass, to the electronic scale, is precisely cancelled by contribution of the fermion, the partner of this boson, if supersymmetry is exact. Likewise, contribution of gauge bosons is cancelled out by gauginos if supersymmetry is exact. If supersymmetry is not exact, then there is a slight mismatch, but that goes in this direction so that the mismatch is going to be small, and therefore the electric scale is stable in this case. So that's just what one needs. And that's why many people are so excited about the supersymmetry. Now, on cosmology side, that's amazing how fast cosmology makes it to exact science. I remember when I was a graduate student, cosmology was very vague, and talking with people about cosmology was kind of bad taste. Now it's an exact science. That's very, very amazing. So we have plenty of data, and for the future, for the sake of the discussion, it would be it's worth recalling that the earliest time in the thermal history of the universe, which has been probed so far, is the time of Big Bang nuclear synthesis, which corresponds roughly to a few hundred seconds after the Big Bang, and temperatures in the MeV to a few tenths of keV range, when the thermonuclear reactions occurred and left the traces in the composition of the primordial plasma in the universe. So this can be measured, and there is confidence that we understand how the universe expanded and how the cosmic plasma behaved at these temperatures and at lifetime of about 1 second. So that's the earliest time. Later, we have excellent data about the universe at about 400,000 years old, the time of recombination when the transition from plasma to gas occurred, and cosmic microwave background photons decoupled. An interesting story in this regard is polarization of cosmic microwave background, which is in the infancy, but it's going to be a very interesting story later on. And of course, we have many ways to measure the present universe, or recent universe. So there is plenty of data about our universe, and it gives overall consistent picture of the present and also the early universe, which is to a large extent orthogonal to what we know in particle physics. Namely, there are three big problems. One is dark matter, which constitutes about a quarter of the energy density, dark energy, and another question is the fact that there is no antimatter in the universe. So there are three big issues, three unknowns in cosmology. And the standard model cannot deal with either of these three. Dark matter, we have astrophysical evidence for dark matter, of course, for a very long time, since 1930s. Namely, there are various ways to measure gravitational potentials in galaxies and in clusters of galaxies, and these measurements show that visible matter or gas in these clusters is a relatively small fraction of the total mass. What is important for the discussion is that, in fact, dark matter is very important for us, for our existence. The argument goes as follows. We know from the cosmic microwave background that density perturbations at recombination at this epoch of 400,000 after the Big Bang, that the density perturbations were small in amplitude. Their amplitude was a few times 10 to the minus 5. That's precisely the scale of the temperature and isotropy of the cosmic microwave background. On the other hand, we know that matter perturbations grow inversely proportional to temperature. Temperature drops down from 3000 Kelvin to 2.7 Kelvin today, and accordingly the matter perturbations has dropped. However, the perturbations in the baryonic matter grow only after recombination. When they decouple from photons, pressure becomes suddenly nearly zero, and only in this case the perturbations in baryonic matter can grow. Before that, the pressure of photons interacting with baryons was very large, and there was no growth of perturbations. So, if there were no dark matter, then we would have today the density contrast equal to this factor of 1,000, the ratio of temperatures today and at recombination, times the initial amplitude, and that would be a few percent. So if we had only baryons, then we would not have any structure, any stars, galaxies, nothing. The universe would be more or less homogeneous, even today. Fortunately for us, perturbations in dark matter do not interact with photons, so they start to grow much earlier. The picture is this. At recombination, the baryon perturbations start to grow, but before that, the perturbations in dark matter grow and make the potential wells into which baryons fall, and in the end form galaxies, stars, and us. So dark matter is a happy thing for us. Right? Another happy thing is baryon asymmetry of the universe. We know that there is matter, fortunately, we are here, in the universe, and no antimatter. And that's very nice, because if there were equal number of particles and antiparticles in the universe, they would annihilate, and the universe would be essentially empty of any matter whatsoever. So it's again something which is very nice for our existence. The baryon symmetry of the universe today is characterized by baryon to photon ratio, which is nearly constant in time, not exactly, but nearly constant in time, and presently it's about 6 times 10 to the minus 10. So what's the problem? The problem is that if you go backwards in time to the early universe and go to temperatures of 400 MeV or higher, then the energies of particles in the plasma are so high that there is pair creation of all kinds of particles, quarks and antiquarks in particular. And at these temperatures, the number densities of quarks and antiquarks was more or less the same as the number density of photons, so that this number tells you that per billion quark-antiquark pairs, there was one uncompensated quark, which is very strange, which is something that you would like to explain. You would like to understand how this tiny excess of quarks over antiquarks was generated in the course of the cosmological evolution. That's again something which one would like to understand. So in the whole picture of the expanding universe, we know the stage of nucleosynthesis, we know the epoch of CMB decoupling, we know present epoch, so this part is more or less, there is a more or less coherent picture of this part of the cosmological evolution. But now we know that there must be some epoch when the dark matter was generated, and there must be some epoch where, at which matter-antimatter asymmetry was generated. So neither dark matter nor matter-antimatter asymmetry can be described, can be understood within the standard model. Now the question is, can this evidence for new physics be different faces of one and the same thing? Whether theoretical prejudice and cosmological evidences for requiring new physics, whether they can be joined into a coherent picture of TeV scale physics. In particular, can dark matter and baryon asymmetry be due to physics at the TeV scale? And obviously this question has to be answered by the Large Hadron Collider. There are pros and contras. Pro is a very nice scenario, very simple, and therefore a nice scenario for generating dark matter. Well, first of all, dark matter consists presumably because we do not quite know about that, we haven't detected dark matter particles yet, but it's likely that dark matter consists of new particles, which experience the same gravitational interactions as known particles. These must be stable, on the cosmological scale at least, otherwise they would decay and no dark matter would exist. They must be heavy, they must weigh, and these two requirements, heavy and stable, make any particle in the standard model not a candidate for the dark matter particle. But one needs something else. Stability, by the way, is a very strong condition because stability means that there must be some conserved quantum number that forbids these particles to decay. New conserved quantum number means new symmetry. So the very fact that there exists dark matter tells us that there is some unknown symmetry in the microworld which ensures the stability of that particle. Now, that scenario is what's called WIMP scenario. Namely, one can think of heavy particles that are thermally pair-produced in the early universe when the temperature is comparable to their mass, and then they pair annihilate. At a certain temperature, the pair annihilation rate is so small that the abundance of these particles freezes out, and these are the remaining particles compose dark matter. Once one adopts this scenario, then everything is calculable, and the only unknown parameters are the mass of these particles, and it turns out that the dependence of the abundance of the mass fraction is logarithmic on the mass, so the mass cannot be predicted. However, the annihilation cross-section is the abundance of the mass fraction depends on the annihilation cross-section very strongly, like inverse of the annihilation cross-section, so the cross-section can be predicted very precisely. If you require that these WIMPs, weakly interacting massive particles, have right present abundance, then their mass range is pretty wide. You cannot, because of logarithmic dependence, you can't predict it precisely, but it must be in sort of few tens of GeV or TeV mass range. But the strength of interactions is the same as the weak force. The annihilation cross-section is predicted pretty precisely, and that corresponds to weak interaction strength of annihilation. So that's why they are called weakly interacting. If so, then we are dealing with the mass range and interaction scale, energy scale, precisely of the Large Hadron Collider. And also, since the cross-section is not particularly small, there is a chance to detect these particles in low background conditions, or detect the particles that are produced in the annihilation of these particles. Interestingly, once we know what these dark matter particles are, if these are WIMPs, then we will have a handle on the universe at very high temperatures. Temperatures on the order of 10 GeV as compared to 1 MeV we know of today. So we are going to move on to much earlier history of the universe. That corresponds to 10 to the minus 6 to 10 to the minus 8 seconds after the Big Bang. We will be confident about the cosmological evolution at this fraction of a second after the Big Bang. Again, the example is supersymmetry, the test-scale supersymmetry. The nice feature of supersymmetry in simplest versions is that the largest supersymmetric particle is stable, and in the wide range of parameter space, it's neutral. That's precisely what is needed for dark matter particles. At colliders, these superpartners will be produced in association with other superpartners, so there will be production, say, of gluinos, as shown here, and then chain of decays of these gluinos, and in the end you have neutral particles which are candidates for dark matter particles. They are invisible, but the rest is visible, so you're going to see a number of leptons or quarks, which are jets, hadronic jets, and some energy will be flying away. So these are rather spectacular events, unfortunately not seen yet. There are contrasts. Namely, if you look closer at supersymmetric theories with low energy supersymmetry, they are constrained already pretty strongly by precision data, well before the LHC, mostly from lab. And here is maybe somewhat exaggerated plot where in one of the versions of supersymmetric theories, M-SUGRA, you can plot allowed range of parameter space in, and these are two-dimensionless parameters that are characteristic of these particular realizations of supersymmetric theories, and what is allowed is this green strip. All the rest is either theoretically disallowed, theoretically forbidden, or experimental. So there is not so much room left for supersymmetry even before the Large Hadron Collider. With the Large Hadron Collider, the situation is becoming worse, because there are more and more limits on supersymmetric particles coming from the Large Hadron Collider, and the allowed range of parameter space is shrinking. Likewise, if you think about the WIMPs, the neutralino lattice supersymmetric particles, as candidates for dark matter, again the situation is pretty tense. This is again the parameter space and somewhat different parameterization, but what you need to be in is this barely visible green strip here. Okay. In the bulk of parameter space, what happens is that you overproduce dark matter. The number of neutralinos is way above what is needed for cosmology. So again, this tells you that maybe we are not on the right track with supersymmetry. We'll see. It's again a matter of experiments at Large Hadron Collider to settle the issue. I must say that besides WIMPs, there are many more candidates, and there are very well-motivated candidates like Axion or Gravitino, so WIMP is not the only option. These are often much harder to detect, and and most of them are actually not accessible to the Large Hadron Collider. So we need some luck. Right, okay, let's come to baryon asymmetry. To generate baryon asymmetry, you obviously, from the baryon symmetric initial state, you obviously need baryon number violation. You need to violate baryon number, which actually is not so simple requirement, because the proton, the lightest baryon, has huge lifetime. We know that it lives longer than 10 to 33 years, so you have to work hard to violate baryon number in the universe and not in vacuum here. You need what's called CNCP violation, which is kind of jargon saying that microscopic physics should distinguish between particles and antiparticles. Otherwise, you don't know what you generate, particles or antiparticles. And also you need a thermal inequilibrium, because in thermal equilibrium, the asymmetries tend to equilibrate rather than get generated. So you need all these three conditions to happen, and one can wonder whether baryon asymmetry can be generated due to physics which can be probed by the Large Hadron Collider. And again, there are pros and contras. Pro is that, in fact, baryon number is violated in the Standard Model. In the Standard Model itself. It's not visible at the level of perturbation theory, at the level of final graphs. It's a non-perturbative effect. It requires large fluctuations of gauge fields. Because of that, the zero temperature rate is hugely suppressed, and therefore proton is stable. At high temperatures, however, there are large thermal fluctuations, and it turns out that the baryon number violation is rapid as compared to the cosmological expansion at temperatures exceeding about 100 GeV. So that's something nice about the Standard Model, or electrophysics in general. There is also CP violation in the Standard Model, visible in K-on and B physics. We more or less understand what is going on there. So CP violation appears to be also present. However, there is contra, and contra is that the universe expands actually very slowly at temperatures of interest. Say expansion time at temperature of about 100 GeV is about 10 to the minus 10 seconds. In particle physics standards, it's a huge time. The typical time of electroweak interactions or other interactions at these energies is about 10 to the minus 26 seconds. So there are 16 orders of magnitude between the Hubble expansion rate and the typical rate of reactions in the plasma. So how can you get thermal inequilibrium in this situation? It appears that the only chance is the first order phase transition, which is a highly inequilibrium process. And indeed, we know that electroweak symmetry is broken in vacuum. It is restored at high temperatures, just like, superconductor becomes normal metal at high temperatures. So symmetry is restored. And in principle, transition from unbroken to broken phase in the universe can be first order, in principle. And if so, then everything is fine. The transition occurs by a spontaneous creation of bubbles of the new phase. These bubbles grow. They are born microscopic, 10 to the minus 16 centimeters in the cosmological context, roughly speaking. And they grow almost to the Hubble size, which is in the millimeter range. So this is very in equilibrium process, boiling universe. And during this process, you may hope to generate baryon asymmetry. Now, does this really happen? No, not in the Standard Model itself. Standard Model is fully calculable. Right? Once you know that the range of the Higgs boson masses, you can calculate what's happening at final temperature in the Standard Model. And it turns out there is no phase transition whatsoever. It's a smooth crossover. It's like, the system is similar to liquid vapor. In some range of parameters you have a first order phase transition, but in the range of parameters allowed by experiment, in the Standard Model, there is no phase transition at all. Also, in the Standard Model, there is CP violation, but it's way too small. When people are doing experiments on B physics or K-on physics and studying CP violation, the systems tell you that they are studying effects which may be relevant to baryon asymmetry. Don't believe it. It's not true. It's pure propaganda. The K-on physics and B physics we know of has nothing to do with baryons. The CP violation there is way too weak. So what do we need? Well, we need, first of all, first order phase transition. For that, we need extra fields, extra particles. They should be present in the plasma at temperature of 4 over 100 GeV, and therefore they must not be very heavy. They must have masses in this 100 GeV range, a range of Large Hadron Collider. We need an extra source of CP violation, and better this source has to be in the Engler-Brown-Higgs sector. So we need more Higgs fields, we need more scalar particles. More generally, the electric baryogenesis at these relatively low temperatures, 100 GeV, requires complex dynamics in the electric symmetry breaking. And that's something that is going to be probed precisely by the Large Hadron Collider. Again, this is not the only appealing scenario. There are other ideas about the generation of baryon symmetry, and there is one question which is still with us, namely we know that baryon mass density and dark matter mass density are close to each other within a factor of 5 or so, and we have no explanation of that whatsoever. In the end, let me point out that cosmology may actually be telling us something different. And that has to do with dark energy, or accelerated expansion of the universe. This is the most mysterious part of knowledge from cosmology. We know that there is dark energy, it doesn't clump, it has negative pressure, gives rise to the accelerated expansion of the universe. Its energy density is almost independent of time, and it corresponds roughly to 4 proton rest energy of 4 protons per cubic meter. So it's pretty small. Another option is that gravity could be different at cosmological scales, but in any case, there is something which doesn't fit into any, extension of the standard model, which is natural from particle physics viewpoint. Now, if vacuum has non-zero energy density, then it would act precisely as dark energy. That will be cosmological constant. So there are 2 cosmological constant problems. One is that we know particle physics scales. These scales start from 1 GeV for strong interactions up to 10 to the 19 GeV for gravitational interactions. And in principle, these scales should characterize the vacuum energy density. If you think this way, then you're off by 40 orders of magnitude at least. Another problem is that the energy scale associated with dark energy is rather 10 to the minus 3 electron volt. So to the 4th power you get at least 40 orders of magnitude discrepancy. Another problem is that even though this vacuum energy density is much smaller than anything you would guess, still it is non-zero observation. And that's another problem. How come? What sets the scale of it? And in fact, this is much worse than the gauge hierarchy problem. We were talking about the fact that electronic scale and the gravity scale are very different. Here, again, we have very different energy scales, but unlike the gauge hierarchy problem, there is no solution proposed so far. No compelling argument or mechanism that would ensure that the scale of vacuum energy density is much smaller than the Planck scales. And this is the situation for 40 years at least. I learned this from Yakov Zeldovich in the 70s, but that was already something very well appreciated. So cosmological constant problem may point to something very unpleasant for a theorist, anthropic selection. The observation is that if the vacuum energy density were, say, 100 times larger than it is in reality, then it would not be existing. The star would not form because the expansion of the universe would be accelerated, it would be so fast that there would be simply no time for stars and galaxies to get formed. So it appears to be a friendly coincidence that the cosmological constant is so small. There are many more. if you think of in this fashion, then you see there are many, many nice things about our world. For example, primordial density perturbations, 10 to the minus 5 in amplitude, originally, and this is just right, so that the galaxies get formed, but not supermassive galaxies where no planetary system would exist. Dark matter is there, it's there to produce potential wells for galaxies. If you look at the particle physics, then you understand that the masses of neutron and proton are such that the neutron is somewhat heavier than proton, but not much heavier, so that hydrogen is stable and nuclei are stable, right? And that's not trivial, because if you vary light quark masses or electromagnetic coupling constant, then you get a completely different picture. Say unstable neutron within nuclei and no elements. There are many more. By the way, light quark masses, according to the standard model, are set by the electroweak scale. So if the electroweak scale was, say, 100 times larger than it is, then we would not have nuclei. We would have only protons in the universe. So is the electroweak scale a friendly fine-tuning? Entirely different line of thought, right, compared to the dynamical solutions of the gauge hierarchy problem. So entropic reasoning starts from the assumption that the universe can be huge, much, much bigger than the part that we see. And it has different very large patches which have different coupling constants, masses, mass scales, other fundamental parameters, maybe even different physical laws in different places in the universe. Then we are in the place where the parameters are just right. Everywhere else we couldn't simply exist. As Brandon Carter formulated, our location in the universe is necessarily privileged to the extent of being compatible with our existence as observers. If so, then this viewpoint is of course very disappointing. Instead of trying to figure out mechanisms of explaining various hierarchies, one would simply say that, okay, any fine-tuning is fine. It's hard to disprove, because we do exist. Right? And it may get support from the Large Hadron Collider, because the idea that there is new physics at the TeV scale, whatever it is, supersymmetry or something else, has to do with the hierarchy and the explanation of the hierarchy. If you allow fine-tunings, you don't need explanation, you don't need new physics. So if there is not enough new physics at the Large Hadron Collider, then we'll start thinking, and some people already have started thinking, that the entropic argument can be applied also to the electron scale. So the Large Hadron Collider is going to tell us whether nature is natural and friendly, or it is friendly, and that's why it is very unnatural. Okay, let me conclude by saying that we're living through very interesting times. And I'm jealous to my younger colleagues, because the last maybe 30 years or so, were experimental discoveries that actually were confirming theory. Now we are at crossroads. Theorists are pretty much confused, so the particle physics became, again, experimental science. LHC may discover something which is crucial for our existence: dark matter, dynamics behind the baryon symmetry, and it's feasible that our fantasy is not enough. Maybe it is going to discover dark matter or way of generating baryon symmetry, which is completely different from our present thought. It may find something entirely different, even more profound. People are discussing extra dimensions, TeV scale of gravity, and things like those. Very fascinating. Probably not very likely. It may support anthropic viewpoint. That would be interesting, whether it does it or not. It's an interesting question. And certainly it will change the perception of physics and cosmology as well.
You said in the beginning that there were constraints that pretty much put you in a situation where you would have something that looks like a normal Higgs or very close to it.
Right.
And you sort of indicated that these other scenarios of, I guess you refer to Technicolor and other
yeah, Technicolor
they are excluded.
Technicolor is not excluded, but I personally tried to, the last year or so, tried to find even contrived Technicolor model which would be consistent with constraints and fail.
Because some people are talking a lot about it these days.
That's right, but if you look more closely, then you find that it's very often that people set aside some, some data and, think about nice properties of their models without taking all the constraints together and checking whether the model satisfies these constraints or not. And it turns out that if you try to satisfy all constraints, then it's at least very difficult and possibly impossible at all.
I wonder if you could sharpen your presentation. I'm thinking of first and third bullet. And I almost got the impression that you say that if we don't find the new physics in the first bullet, we'll have to go to the third one. Is it really so? Or could you...
Not so much dark matter. If we don't find physics, new physics beyond the standard model, set aside dark matter baryon symmetry. Okay. Dark matter you can generate at much higher energies, temperatures, and baryon symmetry likewise. But if you think about gauge hierarchy problem, then ought to be solved at TeV. So if there is no physics responsible for stabilizing the Higgs mass or electric scale, if LHC doesn't see it, then we'd have to go to the third bullet.
And you can't push that TeV up to 20 TeV?
No, not me. Possibly. Other theorists would probably do that, but I won't.
I think you said that baryon number violation was easy to explain with a standard model or something like this?
Yeah, the baryon number is violated at high temperatures in the standard model. Yes.
Through which mechanism?
Well, that's a long story. I will be happy to tell you, but that's non-perturbative mechanism, and it's not immediate. It's an interesting mechanism, theoretical mechanism, but it's not immediate to explain in detail. But
but there's no evidence for it, right? Or
no, you need high temperature.
Okay.
You need high temperature. In some sense, it's multi-particle process. When the initial state contains many particles, and you can't produce such a state at collision. So, but at high temperature, you have a large occupation number of, in any mode. So you can have multi-particle processes with many particles in the initial state. That has to do with enhancement of Bose distribution function at lower momentum. So it's kind of tricky. At some point, people thought that it would be possible, not at LHC, at that time it was SSC, superconducting supercollider, that at superconducting supercollider, one might be able to start seeing baryon number violation, electric baryon number violation. But after many years of work, it turned out that the cross-section is very small.
questions? Well, let's thank the speaker again.